With the first few waves of free agency in the books for the NFL, we have a much better picture of what the NFL draft will look like come April. We are going to be looking at a 2-round NFL mock draft based on all of the moves that the teams took in free agency and how that changed the outlook of the draft. Let's dive right into this mock draft. Things certainly may change as more signings happen, more trades happen, but let's look at this NFL draft and what might happen. And I think it's going to continue to be Caleb Williams at number 1 overall. They still haven't moved Justin Fields, but I really do not think that is, them saying that Justin Fields is going to be the quarterback next year. I think that they have honed in on Caleb Williams being the first overall pick, and I would be pretty surprised if he is not the first overall pick come April. At number 2, I definitely think there's some validity to Drake May versus Jaden Daniels here I think the Commanders could go either way. I could certainly see them liking May, but I could also like the kind of more dynamic and explosive Jaden Daniels when it comes to his ability in the running game. So I am going to go with Jaden Daniels here. I'll be very curious to see how that changes the outlook of the draft. I don't know that the Patriots love both of those quarterbacks. I think they may only like one. That may lead to a trade back. And I definitely think that it could affect who teams are looking to come up for as well. In this situation, I do think the Patriots could potentially trade back, and I think the Vikings are absolutely going to be in this mix. The Vikings just traded, for a second first-round pick, the 23rd overall pick. It's going to take a lot to get up to number 3. I think they're likely going to have to give up, 11, 23, and a first next year. They may get like a third back as well, but you look at kind of what San Francisco gave up to go up to number 3 and get Trey Lance when they did in 2021. I think it's going to be a similar price, 11, 23, and a first next year for number 3 overall and a third back. And I think they are going to come up and select Drake May. I think Kevin O'Connell would really like Drake May in his offense, somebody that can attack over the middle of the field. I think he's the best quarterback in this draft at attacking the middle of the field. And I definitely think that he would fit what the Vikings are looking for very well. At number 4, we have the Arizona Cardinals. I think this is an easy Marvin Harrison Jr. selection. I do think that, after losing Hollywood Brown in particular, this selection is going to be made pretty easy by them just selecting Marvin Harrison Jr. and moving on. Next, we have the Los Angeles Chargers. Trade away Keenan Allen, you cut Mike Williams. Wide receiver is a huge need on this team. I could certainly see them trading down. It sounds like that might be an option, but I think, with Malik Neighbors and Rome Odunze looking at you at this point, I do think it just makes sense to basically select which one you like more. I like Neighbors slightly more, so I do think the Chargers would as well. You got to get Justin Herbert some weapons. I understand that, Jim Harbaugh is going to be a guy that we all associate with running the football, playing good defense, having a good offensive line. But when you have Justin Herbert, you have to have some wide receivers in that room. And, Quentin Johnston was bad last year. Josh Palmer, that's just not good enough to be an NFL wide receiver room. Getting somebody like Malik Neighbors, I think, is going to be very, very important for this team. Number 6, we have the New York Giants. I could see them taking Rome Odunze, but I really do think that in this case, they would be interested in JJ McCarthy. I don't know that they would trade up, but I think that if McCarthy is there at 6, I do think he is going to be the pick. And you have Daniel Jones. You can move off of him next year. You've got Drew Lock as well, who you just signed. I don't think that indicates that they're not taking a quarterback. I just think they wanted contingency plans in case McCarthy and the other 3 guys were already gone. That's certainly possible. So I think in this situation, McCarthy does go 6th overall, and he has an opportunity to sit, which I think will be really important for his development. Brian Daboll, I do think, can do well with him, even if I think this is an overdraft based on what he's shown in college. The NFL is just much higher on him, and I do think he'll be a top 10 pick ultimately, and I think the Giants could certainly be that location. Then we have the Titans at 7. Going to go with Joe Alt. For a time there, I thought they could go wide receiver, and Rome Odunze is looking at them at the moment. But I just think that after signing Calvin Ridley, you already have DeAndre Hopkins, Treylon Burks. You have a lot invested there at the moment. And I think after releasing Andre Dillard and not having a lot on that offensive line, having Bill Callahan as your offensive line coach, you want to get some talent in that room. Joe Alt is the cleanest offensive tackle prospect for sure, in my opinion, in this draft, and getting him at pick 7 I think is good value and really fills a major area of need for the Titans. At number 8, the Falcons on the clock, and I'm actually going to have them trade down. I do think that they could look to, take a wide receiver. You could take your favorite edge rusher. But I think for the New England Patriots, you just acquired some additional draft capital. And I think you could give up, potentially 68 and 11, move up 3 spots, and go secure yourself Rome Odunze. And I think that that's going to be really, really important because he's not making it to pick 11. That's for sure, because I think the Bears will take him with the very next selection. So I think going Rome Odunze, gating, Jacoby Brissett for this year, but ultimately our quarterback of the future, a good target in Rome Odunze, I think is going to be really, really important. A little bit of extra maneuvering from the Patriots in this draft, trade down, trade back up. We've seen it before. The Cardinals did it last year to go get Paris Johnson Jr., so I definitely think that could be in play at pick 8. And that's kind of unfortunate for the Bears. I think after signing Gerald Everett, Brock Bowers is likely not in play here. I could see them taking Byron Murphy or one of the edge rushers, and ultimately I am going to have them going with an edge rusher. I think Jared Verse fits a little bit more what they would want. Turner is a bit more explosive, but he's not necessarily as good of a run defender. Verse just has that rare power. He's got just amazing pop in his hands, and I think he's an underrated athlete as well. He did really well at the Combine when it came to just speed and athleticism, so he kind of fits the mold of what Matt Eberflus and Ryan Poles like in their defensive ends. So I think Verse, if the receivers are off the board, would be the selection for the Bears at number 9. At number 10, the New York Jets, they signed Tyron Smith to be their left tackle. It's 1 year, $20 million. That's a lot of money that could still certainly take a tackle, and I don't think that's out of the question at all. But you have Morgan Moses now at right tackle as well. Your line is relatively set. You get signed John Simpson, you have Joe Tippmann, you have Elijah Vera Tucker. Your starting 5 is pretty much set. So I think they could look elsewhere, and I'm going to go with Brock Bowers here. I think continuing to get weapons for Aaron Rodgers is going to be important. Garrett Wilson's a great player, but there's not much else there, and Brock Bowers would really open up the middle of that field. They don't have a lot in the tight end room. Conklin, it's fine. Jeremy Ruckert's still there, but Brock Bowers is kind of a different cat to bring to this offense, and I think that they could certainly be interested there. At 11, we have the Falcons. They still are able to get, their choice of defensive linemen besides Jared Verse, basically. I think they would only do this trade down if they were comfortable taking either Verse or Dallas Turner, but Turner just provides great explosiveness. He would be that edge rusher that can bring a little bit more pop and juice to this defensive unit for Raheem Morris, and I definitely think that he would be a good fit there. You're able to pick up extra draft pick to trade down and get him anyway, so I definitely think that makes a ton of sense for the Falcons at number 11. At 12, the Broncos are in a tough spot. You could take quarterback 5, but that's rich. The issue is they're likely not going to have a pick until the 3rd round unless they're trading up. And this is really their opportunity to get somebody if they want one. But with 5 quarterbacks already off the board, it just seems like a massive reach. So I'm going to have them taking, potentially their number 1 corner in Terrion Arnold out of Alabama. Pat Surtain is, fantastic. Arnold would help to secure the back end of that defense, and I definitely think that that's a plausible pick for them. Corner 2 is a massive need. Maybe something that doesn't seem like a huge need for them since they already have one of the best corners in football, but that other spot has been a problem for them for the past couple of years, and they need to limit explosive plays on defense, and Arnold, I think, would be the kind of player that could do that. At pick 13 for the Raiders, for a long time, defensive tackle was the easy selection here, Byron Murphy, Trezon Newton, but they filled that with Christian Wilkins in an insane contract, but he is brought in. You have Max Crosby as well. That defensive line is looking a little bit better. Right tackle is a major need now. Jermaine Illuminor has left, so I think Talise Fuaga just makes way too much sense. He'd bring the nastiness that Antonio Pierce would love on his offensive line, and I think it just makes so much sense from a scheme fit, from a personality fit, and a need fit. I think that is one of the easier picks in this draft. At pick 14 for the Saints, I think they need a tackle as well. Troy Fautanu certainly could be on the board. I'm going to go with Olu Fashanu. They seem to like, guys that really have great movement ability. Fautanu absolutely does, but Fashanu, he is a rare breed when it comes to his athleticism. I still think he can continue to get stronger. I think he can get a better anchor and continue to deal with power in better ways, but Right now, I think he has a ton of raw talent. He's still super young and somebody that I think the Saints could definitely really have a lot of interest in molding and, putting in that left side. Trevor Penning's been awful so far, so, cut your loss, maybe move him into guard, and Fashanu could take over as left tackle of the future. At pick 15 for the Colts, I've mocked Brock Bowers here a lot. I've mocked Quinyon Mitchell here a lot. I definitely still think they could go with Mitchell, but it sounds like potentially L'Jarius Sneed may be on the move to the Colts. As of right now, when I'm recording this, he isn't, but that's still certainly an option if he doesn't end up going to Indianapolis. And even if he does, I think they could still certainly take him. But another guy I think they could really, really like is Brian Thomas Jr. out of LSU. Maybe Alec Pierce hasn't given them the deep threat ability that they really loved out of him. With Anthony Richardson, I think you want to continue to add speed and a lot of different weapons to that offense. They love just athletic freaks matched with production, and that's exactly what Brian Thomas Jr. was. Had 17 touchdowns last year for LSU. This guy is going to go, I think, relatively high in this draft, and I wouldn't be at all surprised to see the Colts be interested in him at pick 15. At 16, going to go with Jackson Powers Johnson out of Oregon. Whether he's playing center or left guard, where they lost Damian Lewis, I definitely think he could be on the table for them. The interior of this offensive line is not in a great place right now. If you look on our lads, their depth chart right now, there was not a single left guard on the roster. So I think Jackson Powers Johnson would slot in nicely there. And I definitely think you could take Troy Fautanu as well, local product, but I really like him out at tackle. I wouldn't move him off of left tackle because of how athletic he is in space. I think he would be a really fine guard as well, but I think that you want to keep him at left tackle for the Seahawks. You already have Charles Cross at left tackle, who's pretty good. So Jackson Powers Johnson is another guy that he's a little bit more of a natural fit on the interior there, and I think that makes a ton of sense for them. At pick 17 for the Jaguars, going to go Quinyon Mitchell. They definitely need help. Darius Williams was released. I still really, really like Tyson Campbell in that room, but I still think you need to add another corner opposite him, and Quinyon Mitchell makes a ton of sense. Athletic freak out of Toledo, had a lot of ball production, was great at the Senior Bowl. Really, he is somebody that fits the mold of what you would want in that corner room. At pick 18, up next, we have my Cincinnati Bengals. I definitely think this board fell relatively nicely for them. You can get Byron Murphy or Drazon Newton right now. The loss of DJ Reader is a major issue, but neither one of these guys are really nose tackles. You could take Troy Fautanu, you could take J.C. Latham, Amarius Mims. There's lots of options. I really think that J.C. Latham is the guy that the Bengals are going to kind of focus in on. I think that they tend to like big guys that aren't easily beat with power. That's definitely J.C. Latham. He's a decent athlete. He's not an amazing athlete, but he's a decent athlete. He's a run grader. He's got great grip strength, somebody that can just kind of move defenders off their spots. I think he makes a ton of sense for what they tend to like, and big position of need as well. He's a natural right tackle. Jonah Williams no longer there. They don't really have a right tackle on the roster, so J.C. Latham I think makes a ton of sense for the Bengals at pick 18. At 19 for the Rams, going to go with Drazon Johnny Newton out of Illinois. Obviously, the retirement of Aaron Donald was surprising, but that leaves a major hole on that defensive front. I love Kobe Turner, but you got to get some more guys in there. Drazon Newton, I think, makes a ton of sense. He can kind of play that 3-4 defensive end or a 4-3 3-tech type of player as well. So some additional versatility, and certainly doesn't replace Aaron Donald, but at least softens the blow of doing so. For the Pittsburgh Steelers here, I actually kind of like the board as well. You've got Cooper DeJean, you got Troy Fontenot, Amarius Mims, Graham Barton, Nate Wiggins, Kool-Aid McKinstry. There's a lot of guys that I think they could like, Zach Frazier as well. So I definitely think that they wouldn't have an issue with trading back. And I think there could be a team like the Arizona Cardinals that want to come up here and go get their guy. I think they could give up 27 and 90. I don't think it would be a huge trade. It's just 7 slots, but getting an additional mid-round pick for the Steelers makes some sense. And I think that makes the Cardinals come up and has the ability to take Byron Murphy out of Texas. That defensive interior, I think, is going to be a unit that can be improved. I think that he's really kind of the last really good interior defensive lineman on the board. I think it's Newton and Murphy. After just seeing Newton go, I think the Cardinals could get a little bit desperate to come up and go get their guy. So I think Murphy fits a major need on that defensive front. He's a really good pass rusher. He can penetrate, and I think he holds up relatively well against the run as well. So I think that would be a good selection for the Cardinals there. At 21 for the Dolphins, going to go with Troy Fautanu out of Washington. I think that, he can play left tackle if Armstead goes down, but there's also a lot of help that he can provide on the interior, on the right side. I think he's an incredibly versatile lineman. I do ultimately think that the long-term plan will be to have him be their left tackle of the future, but in the meantime, he can certainly fill in at left guard, at center, whatever you need him to do, really, I think he could be successful at. And that Dolphins team was ravaged by free agency, so they need to get better in some really key areas, and I think that starts with the offensive line. At pick 22 for the Eagles, I still think corner is a massive need, and I'm going to go with Cooper DeJean here. I think you could certainly go with Wiggins, you could certainly go with a lot of other players, but DeJean is probably the best tackler in this class. He's super physical. He'll come up and absolutely, get in your wide receiver's face. I think he can be a press man corner, but I think he also has really good instincts and athleticism as well. For the Eagles, Darius Slay, James Bradbury just weren't good enough last year. They're starting to show their age. They've got some guys lined up, but I really think that getting an infusion of talent like Cooper DeJean would be a big, big improvement for them. With the Patriots up on the clock now at 23, formerly, the Vikings pick, although that came from Houston, previously from Cleveland, so this pick has moved quite a bit. I'm going to go with Amarius Mims from Georgia. I think he can play left tackle. I think he could play right tackle. Really, this is about the Patriots continuing to add talent around whoever their quarterback is going to be. And this year I think Jacoby Brissett, but you've got to fix the offensive line. You got to get some weapons. You got Roma Dunze, you get Amarius Mims. I think that's a pretty good haul so far for the Patriots. And then at pick 24 for the Cowboys, I think this could go in a variety of different ways, but I think they need help on the interior. I'm going to go with Zach Frazier. He can play center. He can play guard. After losing Tyron Smith, that means Tyler Smith is going to be kicking out to left tackle. Leaves kind of a hole at left guard. I think losing, their center in free agency as well. There's some holes on the interior, and I think that the Cowboys need to address them. Frazier makes a ton of sense. I think he can play any of the three interior positions, and that's going to be big for his versatility and his value for the Cowboys as well. That's pick 25 for the Green Bay Packers. They could go in a lot of different ways. I'm going to go Tyler Guyton out of Oklahoma. Zach Tom may be playing right tackle. I think Rasheed Walker did a decent job at left tackle, but they tend to like drafting athletic, developmental offensive linemen with a lot of talent, and I think that definitely describes Tyler Guyton. I think they can kind of figure out their best positions amongst their offensive line, but getting somebody like Guyton in the building, somebody that they feel can develop and be a franchise tackle for them, I think would be really, really good for them as well. At 26 for the Buccaneers, you lose Shaq Barrett. I think Laiatu Latu makes so much sense. He's an incredible value for me at this point here. Be curious to see if the medicals push him down the board. His athleticism, I think, was better than people expected at the combine, so maybe he doesn't fall this far. I certainly wouldn't have him fall this far because I think he is such a polished technician of an edge rusher, but I think for the Bucs at pick 26, if he is there, absolutely snatch him up, and I think they certainly would, even though Graham Barton is there, and I think he would be a kind of player that they like as well. And speaking of Graham Barton, that's where I'm going to go with the Pittsburgh Steelers here. He can play really any of the 5 spots on the offensive line. They need to continue to get better in that area. Interior, I think, is definitely going to be a place they can get better. You have Broderick Jones. The other tackle spot is still, I think, up in the air. So Barton can really play all across the offensive line, provides you some versatility, and allows you to get your best 5 offensive linemen out there. So I like that pick for the Steelers. And 28, I'm going to go with Nate Wiggins for the Bills. You lose Tre'Davious White. There's not really any wide receivers that I love at this point. A.D. Mitchell, absolutely, I think you can make the case for. But I think you can get speedy downfield threats, Gabe Davis replacements later on. I think corner is going to be harder to come by. And Nate Wiggins at 28, I think he's a real value as well. So I think it's still a position in need. That secondary has lost a lot of pieces, both your safeties and your corner one as well when he's healthy. So I think this Bills defense, especially in the secondary, does need upgraded, and Nate Wiggins would be a big piece for that. At pick 29, I'm going to go with Kool-Aid McKinstry for the Lions. You got Carlton Davis. I still think corner is a big need for him. You could go into your offensive line, but it's kind of a little bit dry at that well right now. So I think taking Kool-Aid McKinstry makes a ton of sense. Physical corner that'll come up and tackle. I think he fits kind of what the Lions would want in their cornerbacks as well. So I think that makes a ton of sense. At pick 30 for the Ravens, I'm going to go with Adonai Mitchell out of Texas. I think that, his athleticism, size is really impressive. He does take plays off, and he's not always consistent in his route running, his effort. He's just inconsistent right now. But I think that Lamar Jackson would potentially be able to get the most out of him. Having him and Zay Flowers in the same wide receiver room would be awesome. And, it is kind of a need again. Rashad Bateman just continues to not take that step that we kind of all expected him to. Odell Beckham now gone, a free agent as well. So the wide receiver is still a major need for them, and I think Mitchell makes a ton of sense. At pick 31, we have, I'm going to go with Jordan Morgan out of Arizona. I think that he is probably going to be a guard at the next level, but whether he's a guard or a tackle, I think the 49ers could use him. I think he's athletic enough. He's not somebody I am personally super high on, but I think the league is going to be higher on him than I am. And I think for the 49ers, getting a versatile offensive lineman does fill a need for them as well. So I certainly think that makes sense. And then at pick 32 for the Kansas City Chiefs, I think they could go in a lot of different directions. I'm going to go with Darius Robinson out of Missouri. He's an inside-outside versatility kind of player. I think continuing to add to that pass rush is something that they could certainly do, and I think Robinson is a big guy, a lot of effort, had a really good Senior Bowl. I definitely could see him sneaking into the end of the first round. Now we have the Carolina Panthers at pick 33. For a long time, pretty much everybody, including myself, just had them taking the best wide receiver on the board because you got to get help for Bryce Young. But I think after acquiring pick 39, trading for Deontay Johnson, potentially bringing in Mike Williams after he's visiting, I definitely think that maybe wide receiver isn't where you have to go with pick 33. And after losing a really, really good player in Brian Burns, I think edge rusher is going to be a major need. Chopper Robinson makes a ton of sense. He's kind of in the somewhat same mold as Brian Burns. Burns was a much more polished prospect coming out, but he was an athletic freak that could turn the edge and be, really athletic in, just winning with speed. And I think Chopper Robinson absolutely has that as well. Their edge room right now is just non-existent. You lose Yetur Gross-Matos as well, so you need to add some talent to that room. I think it's much less likely that Chopper Robinson or one of those really good edge rushers are going to make it to you at 39 than a wide receiver. So I think you take Robinson now, and then you can take your wide receiver at pick 39 once we get there. At 34 for the Patriots, I am going to go with Michael Penix Jr. here. I think that, maybe he doesn't end up being their franchise quarterback, but taking a swing in round 2 after you have already acquired Amarius Mims and Rome Odunze, his college teammate who he had so much success with, I think that makes a ton of sense, and that's actually a situation I kind of like for Michael Penix. He doesn't have to start right away. Jacoby Brissett comes in there, and you actually have a real offensive tackle prospect in there. You have a real wide receiver prospect in there. I kind of feel better about this than getting, say, Jaden Daniels and, maybe drafting a wide receiver, like somebody like, I don't know, Ladd McConkey. Is Jaden Daniels and Ladd McConkey better than Michael Penix and Rome Odunze and Amarius Mims? Maybe, but I think it's relatively comparable. You can still draft your franchise quarterback next year if everything falls apart. So I definitely like this move for the Patriots. At pick 35 for the Cardinals, we've already gotten them some nice pieces. Byron Murphy, Marvin Harrison. I think that Ennis Rakestraw would be somebody they would be interested in as well. He's physical. He'll come up and tackle. Didn't necessarily have the best combine, but I still think he's going to be in this conversation for the early second round. And I definitely think that he brings some nastiness and some juice to that secondary that they definitely need. The Commanders up next. Obviously, we got them Jaden Daniels earlier in this draft. I'm going to go with Kingsley Suamataia, the tackle out of BYU. He's still somebody that's super raw, and he needs a lot of development, but I think that right now, the Commanders just need talent in that offensive line room. It is really bad right now, and I think putting Jaden Daniels behind that kind of offensive line is just a recipe for disaster. So getting somebody like Kingsley Suamataia, who you can develop and potentially be a long-term tackle option for you, I think makes a ton of sense. He's got tons and loads of natural talent. You just got to have him, develop nicely, which I think the Commanders could potentially do. At pick 37 for the Chargers, I just think it makes so much sense to have them taking somebody like Chris Jenkins. He's a great run defender. I think they need that on the interior. They are spending a lot of money on the defensive line. I still think that the interior, though, is kind of a bit of a mess. So getting somebody like Chris Jenkins, who can be an excellent run defender, really help limit some of the big plays that the Chargers have consistently given up in the run game over the past few years. I think Jenkins makes a ton of sense, and obviously the Harbaugh and Michigan connection, just makes that pick even easier. At pick 38 for the Titans, going to go Kamari Lassiter. There's reports that he ran a 4.6 at his pro day, other reports that he ran a 4.5. He's just so instinctual, and I get it. Like, there's not many corners that have done well with running a 4.6, but I think if it's closer to a 4.55 or a 4.5, I'm really not that concerned about it because, that's what Terrion Arnold ran as well. Nobody's freaking out about that. I think Lassiter is one of the most instinctual guys in this class. He's so sticky. He just reads routes so well. I had him at corner 2 earlier this year, and athleticism concerns are going to drop him further than that. But I had him as a real first-round talent, and I don't think the tape lies. I think he's plenty athletic enough to stay with guys, and I think getting him pick 38 for the Titans here would not be a bad option by any means at all. At pick 39 for the Panthers, you have plenty of options at wide receiver. You could get Ladd McConkey, Troy Franklin, Roman Wilson, Ricky Pearsall. I think Franklin makes the most sense. He's kind of that deep threat, somebody that can take the top off the defense, can get you some yards after catch if you give him in space. So I like Troy Franklin getting added to that room for Bryce Young. At pick 40 for the Commanders, another team that has lost pretty much all their edge rushers. We got them Kingsley Suamataia just a few picks ago. Going to go with Chris Braswell out of Alabama now. Somebody that I think could potentially be a nice edge 2 most likely for them. They don't have an edge 1 on the roster, but they don't have much of anything on the roster at edge rush position at the moment. So I think you have to get a guy in there that at least has potential to turn into a nice player for you. I think Braswell could absolutely do that. Pick 41 for the Green Bay Packers. This was from the Aaron Rodgers trade. I'm going to go with Tyler Nubin out of Minnesota. I think getting Xavier McKinney was an awesome get for them, even if it was a bigger contract. I don't think that safety is just like a massive need like it was before, but I think getting a guy like Tyler Nubin, who's a really quality player, the best safety in the draft in my opinion, getting him at pick 41, I think that really kind of rounds out your secondary, and that's a really nice selection and value at pick 41 for the Packers. At pick 42 for the Texans, going to go with Braden Fisk out of Florida State. They were in the race for Eric Armstead and a couple of other guys in Houston. I think they wanted to add one more guy potentially to the interior of that defensive line, and I think Fisk makes a ton of sense. He's somebody with super high motor, really good athleticism. I think he's somebody that D'Amico Ryans would love in that room at pick 42, so I think that makes a ton of sense for them there. At pick 43 for the Atlanta Falcons, now back on the clock. Going to go Mike Sarenstill out of Michigan. This guy just flies around, makes plays. I think you've got some decent corners. Clark Phillips, I think, showed some nice things last year as a rookie. A.J. Terrell is still a really good corner as well, but getting Mikey Sarenstill to play in that slot position, I think, makes a ton of sense. I really, really like him in that position. Pick 44 for the Raiders. I'm going to go Bo Nix out of Oregon. Obviously, you bring in Gardner Minshew. You already have Aiden O'Connell on the roster, but I think Nix just gives you kind of a nice high floor guy. Once again, in round 2, I have absolutely no issues taking a guy like Bo Nix, and I definitely think that he could be in the conversation to be in that starting quarterback for the Raiders, moving forward as well. Pick 45 for the Saints. We got them Olu Fashanu earlier in this draft. Going to go with Adisa Isaac out of Penn State, somebody with some really good athleticism. I think you can win in a couple of different ways as well. You don't have a lot in the edge rush position. Curtis Granderson has been a nice player for them. Cam Jordan is not the same player that he once was, and Isaac may not fit the traditional mold of what the Saints typically look for. He's not quite as big as they typically look at in their edge rushers. I think they need to add some speed and explosiveness to that room, and Isaac definitely can provide that. At pick 46 for the Colts, we had them taking Brian Thomas Jr. I'm pretty good with where they're at defensively. I think they've got a really good defensive front. Their corner room is shaping up nicely. If they get L'Jarius Sneed, I'm not worried too much about their corner room. I was a big fan of Juju Brents from last year as well. So I think they've got some nice players on that side. And I'm pretty much on the train of get your guy, Anthony Richardson, as many weapons as possible. Go get Jatavian Sanders. He's not Brock Bowers, but I think he's clearly tight end 2 in this class, and getting him mid-second round I think is pretty good value as well. So getting Jatavian Sanders at pick 46, you've got Sanders, you've got Michael Pittman, Jonathan Taylor, you added Brian Thomas Jr., Alec Pierce is still there, Josh Downs. This is a really fun offense, and I think Shane Steichen could take a really good advantage of that offense and all of the weapons that they would have. At pick 47 for the New York Giants, they need to add size to this wide receiver room. this was gotten in the Leonard Williams trade. I still think that you could take somebody like Vlad McConkey, Roman Wilson, guys like that, but Keon Coleman provides just a different type of receiver than they already have. You've already got kind of those shorter separation type guys that aren't winning contested catches downfield, but can get open in intermediate levels. I think getting somebody like Keon Coleman who can win downfield and be a true ball winner for you, especially in the red zone, I think that would be huge for the Giants. And at pick 47, I think the value is totally fine. At pick 48 for the Jacksonville Jaguars, going to go with another wide receiver with some size here. That's going to be Xavier Legette. I think Legette has fallen down draft boards kind of for no real reason besides he is an older prospect with a late breakout, which he didn't have a ton of opportunities to break out. But this dude is built like a running back. He has great ability to time his jumps and get up and be a contested catch weapon. I think he's really good after the catch. I think he's a little underrated in this draft right now. And I think for the Jaguars, who, they don't have a ton of size at the position right now. You have Gabe Davis, who you signed. He's kind of your downfield speed threat. You've got Christian Kirk. You've got some guys, but I think Legette just provides a slightly different element to what they already have on the roster and is a good value at this point as well. At pick 49 for the Cincinnati Bengals, after the departure of DJ Reader, there is a massive hole at defensive tackle, and I think that Tavondre Sweat fits exactly what they need at nose tackle. They already have a couple of 3-techs now in BJ Hill. They just signed Sheldon Rankins to a nice deal. They need a guy that can plug up the run, be a two-gapper, and that's exactly what Tavondre Sweat can do. Like I said, they've got other guys that can play on the interior and help rotate Sweat, which should limit some of his conditioning concerns, things like that. And I think that Sweat is really kind of the only true nose tackle worth a selection on the first couple of days of the draft. So I think getting him for the Bengals would be huge in the middle of round 2 and fills a massive need as well. For pick 50 for the Philadelphia Eagles, I'm going to go with Vlad McConkey out of Georgia. I think that obviously you've got Devontae Smith, you've got A.J. Brown, but I think you could still add another wide receiver to be that slot guy, and McConkey makes a ton of sense in that position. He doesn't have to play in the slot. He can be an outside guy, but he does have that flexibility. I think he's a good route runner. He's a really underrated athlete as well. So I think for pick 50, this makes a ton of sense for the Eagles. At 51 for the Steelers, we had them trading back. I think now they could look to the cornerback position and getting TJ Tampa out of Iowa State. He's somebody that can be physical. He does have great length and size. I really like TJ Tampa, and I think he fits the Steelers' mentality and what they would look for in a corner as well. At pick 52 for the Rams, I think corner is a major need, just kind of secondary in general. And I think Javon Bullard fills multiple roles. He can be a slot corner. He can be a safety. I think he can play, multiple positions, be in that star position. And for the Rams, they need that kind of guy. They need somebody that can come up and be physical in the box, can guard tight ends, can guard slot wide receivers, and, disguise coverages. I think Bullard could absolutely be that player for them. And at pick 52, I think that value makes a ton of sense as well. The Eagles back on the clock after we just had them selecting Vlad McConkey. Going to go with Marshawn Nealand, the edge rusher out of Western Michigan. I think that, Josh Sweat's still there. I think there's a decent chance that they do ultimately trade Hassan Reddick. So I think getting Nealand in the room would make sense. You've got Nolan Smith, and I really liked Nolan Smith last year, so it's not like a major need, but I think Nealand's a pretty good value. Offensive line right now is not really, I don't love the value that they would have at pick 53, so I think getting Nealand makes a lot of sense for them in that spot. The Browns on the clock for their first pick of this draft, and I think Xavier Worthy makes sense. They need a field stretcher. Jerry Jeudy could be that player, but I think Worthy just obviously provides rare speed. 4.21 speed, that's special, and I think the Browns offense does need a little bit more of an explosive element, and like I said, Jeudy could fill that role, but there's just not a ton of major holes on this team, so I think getting somebody with some speed in that room makes a ton of sense. The Dolphins, we already had dive into the offensive line well, but I think they need to do it again. It is a bad unit right now. I think it's probably the biggest issue on this team. So I'm going to go with Christian Haynes out of UConn. I think he can play, either the guard spots as well. So at that point, now you've got Troy Fautanu, you've got Christian Haynes. The offensive line is looking like it's in a much better place than it was before the draft here. So I think that just makes a ton of sense. They don't have a ton of major needs in the secondary or wide receiver. You could use receiver 3 for sure, but they're a relatively decent roster. It's just the offensive line is just a complete mess right now. So I don't mind double dipping at all in that spot. For the Cowboys up next, I think this has to be running back. Deuce Vaughn is the number one running back on the roster right now. No Tony Pollard, no Zeke Elliott anymore, obviously. So I think Jonathan Brooks makes a lot of sense, that Texas connection. I think I like a couple of other running backs better than Jonathan Brooks, but I think for the Cowboys, that's ultimately where they would go with the selection. Coming off a knee injury, so hopefully he can return to form, but before that, looked really, really good at Texas, and they keep him close to home. For the Buccaneers up next, you traded Carlton Davis. Jamel Dean's your number one corner, and he looked rough last year, so I'm going to go with Kyrie Jackson out of Oregon. He's somebody I really like in a man-to-man system. I think he's a pretty decent athlete as well, so I think it's just a major need. It's potentially a little bit of a reach, but ultimately they put themselves in that position. Getting Latu in the first round, I mean, that was excellent value at a position of need as well. So I certainly, don't regret taking him by any means, but that might mean you just have to take the best corner available, which I think is Kyrie Jackson at this point. At pick 58 for the Packers, I think linebacker makes sense. I'm going to go with Peyton Wilson. He provides some serious athleticism. They have a ton of picks in this draft, and they could go in a lot of different ways, but I think Wilson is just really good value for them at this point. Quay Walker, not a player I'm a huge fan of. Devondre Campbell, currently a free agent as well, so I think it is a position in need, and Peyton Wilson makes a ton of sense for them at that spot as well. At pick 59 for the Houston Texans, I'm going to go with Roman Wilson out of Michigan. I like a lot of the receivers that they currently have, Nico Collins, Tank Dell. Getting somebody like Roman Wilson, who I think can win inside or outside. He's got underrated speed, something that I think could be especially successful on play action plays, boots, things like that, where you get him running across the field. I think he's going to be very, very tough to cover at that point. So I think continuing to just add weapons for CJ Stroud and really unlocking this offense makes a ton of sense for this Texans team. At pick 60 for the Buffalo Bills, I think that getting a field stretcher to replace Gabe Davis is going to be a priority, and this is why I didn't feel the need to take one in round one, reach for one of those guys. I don't think there's a major difference between somebody like Tez Walker and somebody that they could have gotten at the end of round one. So Tez Walker at pick 60, I think, is a good value. He's a field stretcher. He does deal with drops. I mean, I think in a lot of ways he is Gabe Davis, which, for better or for worse, you're drafting kind of his replacement here. So I think it makes sense. But I think if he could get his drop problem under control, he could be a nice weapon for Josh Allen at pick 60. 61 for the Detroit Lions. They did lose some guys on the interior of the offensive line, and Christian Mahogany makes a lot of sense for the kind of mentality that I think Dan Campbell and that offense would want. He's nasty on the interior, and Mahogany, I think he would just fit well with what the Lions are trying to do in their offensive line room. Pick 62 for the Ravens. Going to go Rook Ororo. I think out of Clemson, he is a nice pass rusher. He provides some juice, some upside in that game. So continuing to get that pass rush going for the defense for the Ravens, I think makes a lot of sense after taking A.D. Mitchell in offense in round one. Then I'm going to go with Jonah Ellis out of Utah for the 49ers. Ellis is somebody that has a great variety of pass rush moves. He's a bit small. I think he's a good athlete, but he's not like a special athlete, but he has got some really nice moves to him. I think getting him into the San Francisco defensive line room is going to even allow him to elevate his pass rush repertoire even more. And after losing Chase Young, potentially in free agency, I think this just makes sense for the 49ers to address that position. And then for the Chiefs, going to go Ricky Pearsall out of Florida, continuing to add to that wide receiver room, and getting faster and more separation for Patrick Mahomes is never a bad thing at all. So that is going to do it for my 2-round 2024 free agency mock draft. Obviously still very much subject to change based on signings and things that happen around the NFL, but right now this is kind of how I see the NFL draft turning out. Let me know what you think down below. Who do you want your favorite team to draft? What did I miss on in this mock? Let me know in the comments down below. Would love to hear from you. If you like NFL draft content just like this, please hit that subscribe button down below. And while you're down there, hit the like button as well. Just pushes this video out to other NFL draft fans like you, supports the channel, and it would mean the world to me. Thank you so much for watching. I will catch you in the next one.